Friday edition of PFTOT. Some of the things we weren't able to get to during PFT Live. Big Cat and I talked a lot about the Thursday night game and some other topics in the NFL. And I want to go back to the Thursday night game. We ranted in two different segments about the pass interference replay review procedures, the failure to drop a flag not once but twice in the second half when it appeared clear, obvious, and egregious that pass interference had indeed happened. The worst one that I've seen all year was the Avonte Maddox hand to the chin of Marquez Valdez-Scantling of the Packers as the ball was coming in and before the ball came in. That's the kind of thing that has to be overturned via replay review and called defensive pass interference. That is Rams-Saints light. It's not quite as egregious as what we saw in the NFC Championship game, but it's in that same vein. And it's exactly the kind of thing that I have said this standard needs to address. It's the what the hell question. When you're saying after you see the play, what the hell, why isn't there a flag? That's when there needs to be a flag. But earlier in the game, there was an offensive pass interference call that rarely gets made. But now that Al Riveron has been dropping the flag for offensive pass interference after the fact, the blocking more than 1 yard downfield. Last year, I don't think it gets called. It happened last night on a touchdown by the Philadelphia Eagles, and there was a call on the field of offensive pass interference for Zach Ertz blocking downfield. He engaged the player less than a yard from the line of scrimmage. He continued to push beyond that. The flag was thrown. After further review, the flag was picked up. No offensive pass interference. The touchdown stands. And that was surprising to me because if we're going to truly respect clear and obvious significant hindrance, blocking downfield, whatever the standard is. And again, with offensive pass interference before the throw, it's about blocking an opponent more than a yard downfield. It was clearly there. I don't know why they picked it up. Unless they've just decided we're no longer calling this anymore. Unless it's clearly more than a yard downfield. Unless it's 3 or 4 or 5 yards downfield. But we're not going to call it if the block gets started within a yard. I don't know. But my point is this. If the standard is clear and obvious to overturn, it wasn't clear and obvious that there was no offensive pass interference there. So another reason why the NFL needs to reconsider, number one, having replay review for pass interference calls and non-calls, and I think they won't use it next year. But number two, for replay review generally, because it's not an easy thing to do. It sounds easy. It's not easy, especially when you know the eyes of the football world are upon you and your boss may be hovering over your shoulder while you're trying to properly apply the standard. They need to bring back Dean Blandino, whatever it takes. $2 million, $3 million, $5 million, $10 million, whatever it takes. They've got the money. It's the most important job in the NFL during football season. It's the most powerful position. I know Al Riveron would disagree with that, but who has more power right now over the game than the person who can decide touchdowns, no touchdowns, 50 yards of field position, no 50 yards of field position, right? Big play wiped out, big play stands. It's one person who has that power over every single game. Dean Blandino told me a year or two ago the NFL didn't properly value that position. That's why he left for Fox. The NFL needs to value that position. The NFL needs to bring back Dean Blandino or get rid of that position and go back to letting the referees in the stadium make the decisions on replay review. The Vikings may or may not have a decision to make in a few weeks as the trade deadline approaches regarding receiver Stefon Diggs. This is something I wasn't even thinking about until a listener asked this question for the PFTPM podcast earlier in the week. And one of the reasons I take so many questions is, frankly, sometimes the questions I get jar my brain to embrace something I should have already thought of. And that is the question of whether or not the Vikings should trade receiver Stefon Diggs. He has 6 catches for 101 yards and a touchdown this year. And no, that's not the stat line for one game. That's the stat line for 3 games. They've given him a market value contract or close to it. It's a big investment. They'd take a $9 million cap charge next year if they traded him, but they'd also shed the balance of his $8.9 million salary this year and avoid more than $10 million next year that becomes fully guaranteed in March. It makes sense to consider it simply because between Diggs, Adam Thielen, Kirk Cousins, you get to a point where you are paying for a passing game that you're not using, right? It's like having a really nice car but never driving it. If you're not going to drive it, why do you have it? And in this case, it's like having a really nice car with really expensive rims. You're not driving it, but I'll keep the car, but I'll get rid of the rims. I don't need that extra little piece. I'm not using Stefon Diggs. So something to keep in mind. And I think from Diggs' perspective, even though he's gotten his contract, he's probably not real happy with the ball rarely coming in his direction, and this offense that is so premised on run, 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 and for the receivers, it's block, block, block. So, I don't know what's going to happen, but I think from the Vikings' perspective, if there's a need that can be addressed, I mean, maybe, and I saw the VikingAge.com throw in the idea of Stefon Diggs for Jalen Ramsey, although the Vikings would have to add more to it to get Jalen Ramsey, whether it's for help now or whether it is for draft picks in the future, right, to replenish with young, inexpensive talent as you get into the final year of Kirk Cousins' contract next year that is fully guaranteed, and he has a cap charge of $30 million plus. So something for the Vikings to consider and something for Diggs to consider, because this passing game has been set up and the players appropriately compensated to be doing a lot more than they're doing. And strategically, the Vikings aren't using them as much as they could because the Vikings are choosing to run the ball. Oh, and next year they could use the cap space because maybe they're going to need to pay Dalvin Cook, who has become one of the best running backs in the National Football League. Speaking of running backs, a guy who we thought was going to be good, a guy who was drafted before Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson and Christian McCaffrey, Leonard Fournette. He's frustrated. He's not getting enough opportunities to run the ball. And look, I know from last Thursday night's game, and I was a believer that Leonard Fournette was going to be better this year. I thought maybe he'd be the guy that we thought he was going to be based upon his rookie year or his freshman year at LSU when he was just man among boys. And he looks it, right? That's what's so frustrating about it. He looks like a guy who should be steamrolling everyone. But when he gets the ball sometimes, it's like he's running in mud. And that first hit, he's down. Now, he did break a long run late in the game last Thursday night against the Titans. But for the most part, it's just nothing. And there's no punch. There's no explosion. It's almost like he needs 5 yards to get ahead of steam. And he never gets a chance to get ahead of steam because he's hit within the first 5 yards. So, I guess I'd be frustrated if I were him as well. But at the same time, he just doesn't seem to have it to the level that we thought he was going to have it. And I think it's on him if his performance isn't where he wants it to be. Because at least last Thursday night when we were able to really focus on that game and watch that game, I saw a Leonard Fournette with far less punch than I thought he would have this year, or really at any point in his career. Speaking of the Jaguars, Jalen Ramsey, who does a weekly podcast for Uninterrupted and SiriusXM and Pandora, it's called 17 Weeks. He, even though he didn't practice this week and he's not with the Jaguars now, he did appear for his podcast, and he explained that he still wants out of Jacksonville. The trade request still stands. He addressed the illness from Monday in somewhat graphic terms, explaining the very symptoms he had. And look, it's impossible to prove that he wasn't sick, but the thing is, it's one hell of a coincidence. And then to have the back injury on Wednesday, it's one hell of a coincidence in a time when you're making it clear you want out. And now that he's left the team for the birth of a child, which he has every right to do, how long will he stay away? I don't think he's going to be with the team this weekend. When will he return to the Jaguars? Will he continue to agitate for a trade? He's made it clear he wants out. He's made it clear it's about respect. He's made it clear it's not about money. But I still believe that he would feel respected if the Jaguars did show up with a contract that made him the highest paid player at his position. And I think it needs to be more than just a little bit better than Xavier Howard. What they need to do is rip up the final 2 years of his deal, and they need to pay him the Josh Norman contract from 2016, which is $15 million per year at signing. It will be reported and characterized as $18.1 million per year in new money, which would make him by far the highest paid player at his position. But you know what? If you think he is the best player at his position, then pay him accordingly. Figure out how to make it work and keep this guy around. And he's sensed over his time in Jacksonville, they don't value him the way that he thinks they should, so he wants out. And I feel like this is careening towards some sort of solution, but I also believe at that same time the Jaguars are committed to trying to work this out from the perspective of you play for us or you play for no one. And we don't have to do anything, and we're not going to do anything. We'll see if anyone makes the Jaguars an offer that maybe they can't refuse, because some of these teams, like the Eagles, could benefit from adding a player like Jalen Ramsey as they try to position themselves for the postseason. The Kansas City Chiefs are already very well positioned for the postseason with Patrick Mahomes, and I think we've seen time and again in Patrick Mahomes' 20 NFL starts that he truly is a special talent. Maybe the best quarterback we've ever seen. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to continue to play that way, but he kind of is who he is. He moves the way he does. He throws the way he does. Barring injury, this guy is going to continue to be special in a way that we've never witnessed. So, I saw some talk renewed yesterday about what his contract will be worth the next time he signs a deal with the Chiefs. He's still operating under the terms of the contract that he signed as the 10th overall pick back in 2017. And Adam Schefter of ESPN has mentioned a couple times now, back in January the first time and yesterday the most recent, that Mahomes will sign a deal worth $200 million or more. And that really isn't a shock because it'll be a 5-year extension worth $40 million a year. You do the math, that's $200 million. The question is how much will be guaranteed? What will the full structure be? And more importantly, when will they do this deal? Because people think that a player isn't eligible for a contract until his third season ends. And they're right. But the key word is third regular season. And there are people in the league who don't know this because I've had the conversation. I've said, look, here's the page of the CBA where it says completion of the third regular season. The day after Week 17, the Chiefs and Patrick Mahomes could sign a long-term contract. And if I'm Mahomes, if I'm his agents, I'm laying the foundation now to tell the team I want that contract the day after the end of the regular season. The money you get playing those postseason games is peanuts in comparison to what you make in your game checks, and it's definitely peanuts in comparison to what he would make on a new contract. Why put your future payday at risk through extra postseason games when the window is already open on a long-term deal? That's what he needs to be pushing for. Now, will the Chiefs comply? When we interviewed Clark Hunt, the owner of the Chiefs, back in March, he said we've got some opportunities and we're keenly aware of the fact that when you have a young quarterback, the cap burden allows you to build the team around him. So they may not be budgeting a big contract for Patrick Mahomes until we get into 2020, until after March. But if they're wise, they will clear out cap space now. They will have enough left over that they can sign Patrick Mahomes to his new deal during the 2019 league year and as soon as the 2019 regular season ends, because Mahomes deserves it and he should be clamoring for it. And look, there's no real leverage here because it's not like he's going to walk out. But at the same time, the right thing to do, given the special talent that the Chiefs now have and that they hope to have for the next 10, 15, 20 years, get him taken care of financially as soon as possible. And the first possible day is the day after the 2019 regular season ends. Actually, it's after the game ends. Do it that night. Have it ready to go. That's what the Chiefs should do, because when you have a great player, you need to recognize it and you need to act accordingly. And Mahomes, great guy, hasn't changed, incredible quarterback. It would be very wise of the Chiefs to pay him what he's worth the moment that they're able to do so. That's it for today's PFTOT. Check us out all weekend long at ProFootballTalk.com. We'll be back on Monday with another edition of PFT Live. More PFT PMs coming throughout the week. But for now, the focus is on Week 4, and we will do everything we can to get you ready to go for all the action that is to come. Have a great weekend, and we'll talk Monday.